The steel of the handcuffs cut into my wrists at 2:13 in the morning as two officers pulled me out of the home I had poured my entire soul into. But the arrest wasn't what shattered me in that moment. It was the faces waiting for me on the driveway. My aunt, my uncle, and my cousin Layla were standing there beneath the porch light, grinning like they had just won something. Layla had her phone raised high, already live streaming to her 500,000 followers, narrating my humiliation like it was the most satisfying moment of her life. They were so certain they had finally crushed me that they had traded my future for a fortune they never deserved. But before I tell you what they were smiling about, I need you to hit subscribe and follow this story all the way to the end. Because what happened exactly 19 minutes after those squad car doors slammed shut behind me is something that changed the entire trajectory of my life and theirs. My name is Layla. I am 24 years old. And the night I was arrested in front of my own home was also the night my grandfather's final gift to me finally revealed itself. I used to believe, in the way that only someone truly naive can believe, that blood meant loyalty. That no matter how complicated your family was, they would never truly weaponize their love against you. Growing up, that belief felt safe and solid. But the moment those flashlights blinded me through my bedroom window and I heard the heavy boots on my front steps, every illusion I had been carrying collapsed at once. The warrant accused me of something obscene. It claimed I had committed large-scale financial fraud against my own grandfather, a 78-year-old man named Hassan, who had spent his entire life quietly building a real estate portfolio that stretched across 3 counties. The officers read the charges in clipped professional tones, while I stood in my living room in bare feet, hands already behind my back, and I didn't say a single word. Not because I was scared, because I already knew something they didn't. To understand how my own family could orchestrate my arrest and live stream it for public entertainment, you have to understand who my grandfather really was and who they had always been around him. Hassan was not a warm man in the traditional sense. He didn't say I love you easily, and he didn't give compliments the way other grandparents did. What he gave instead was time and quiet trust. He noticed things. He remembered everything. My Aunt Rania and Uncle Tariq had spent years treating him like a transaction. They showed up for birthdays and holidays with rehearsed affection, always steering conversations toward his health, his accounts, his plans for the estate. My cousin Layla was the same, posting curated family photos with him online while barely visiting in person. They were waiting, all 3 of them, with a patience that only greed can manufacture. When Hassan received his diagnosis 2.5 years ago, a degenerative condition that would slowly steal his independence, they disappeared almost immediately. Rania claimed her schedule was impossible. Tariq said the drive was too far. Layla said watching sick people made her anxious. And so, without anyone asking me to, I came. I moved my things into his spare room, canceled the freelance contracts I'd been building, and became the person who was simply there. I learned his medication schedule and his sleep patterns. I sat with him through the nights when the pain was bad and talked with him through the mornings when his mind was sharp and he wanted to reminisce. I drove him to every appointment, filled out every form, and held his hand in every waiting room. For 2 years and 3 months, that was my entire life. And I gave it without resentment because I loved him. Not his estate, him. When Hassan passed away quietly on a Tuesday morning in early spring, his will was read 6 days later in a lawyer's office that smelled of old wood and filtered air. My aunt and uncle arrived in coordinated outfits, barely able to hide their anticipation. What the lawyer revealed shattered them completely. The overwhelming majority of Hassan's estate had been left to me. A small portion was designated for specific charitable funds he had personally chosen. Rania and Tariq received nothing. Layla received nothing. The grief masks fell off their faces within seconds. What replaced them was something I had never seen before in people I had known my entire life. It was a raw, exposed, almost animalistic fury. They accused me of manipulation. They accused me of exploiting a sick old man. They said I had isolated him from his real family and poisoned his mind against them. Within the week, they had hired a private attorney and begun constructing a case. The documents they forged were genuinely sophisticated. Fabricated bank transfer records, altered statements, a manufactured paper trail suggesting I had been systematically draining Hassan's accounts during his most medicated periods. They built the narrative carefully, knowing they couldn't challenge the will directly because Hassan had been fully lucid when he signed it. So instead, they chose to criminalize me. Layla launched the public campaign first. She posted a series of devastated, carefully filmed videos describing how her beloved grandfather had been manipulated and robbed by the very person trusted to care for him. The comment sections filled with outrage within hours. Strangers who had never met any of us were calling for my arrest. The local police department's inbox flooded with messages demanding action, and under the weight of fabricated evidence and manufactured public pressure, a warrant was issued. As the squad car moved away from my house that night, I watched through the rear window as Layla kept filming, her expression bright with satisfaction. My aunt was gripping my uncle's arm and laughing softly. They had planned this moment. They had waited for it, and sitting in the cold plastic back seat with my hands cuffed and my heart aching, I let myself feel the full weight of it before I set it down. Because I already knew what was waiting inside my legal file. The booking room at the precinct was harsh and fluorescent and smelled of stale coffee and something antiseptic. The officer who sat down across from me had the exhausted face of someone who had processed hundreds of routine cases and expected this to be another one. He pulled up the digital warrant and the supporting documents my family had submitted. He began entering my information, and then he stopped. His fingers went completely still above the keyboard. I watched the color leave his face as his eyes moved across the screen. He read it twice. Then he stood up abruptly, grabbed the physical file, and walked quickly into the hallway where I could hear the urgent low murmur of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. The 19 minutes I spent alone in that interrogation room were some of the quietest of my life. I sat straight. I breathed slowly. I kept my eyes on the door and I waited because I knew what was coming. When the door opened, it wasn't the arresting officer who walked in. It was the precinct commander. She was a composed woman in her 50s with close-cropped gray hair, and she was holding my file with both hands. Her expression was not the expression of someone about to charge me with a crime. It was the expression of someone who had just realized the magnitude of what had landed on her desk in the middle of the night. She sat down. She looked at me directly, and she said, "Ms. Layla, you are not a suspect in this case. You are the designated legal trustee and protected beneficiary under a federally registered estate order, and your grandfather was a former district court advisor with federal standing on several active oversight committees." She explained everything, her voice measured and careful. Hassan had known. He had known for months what my family was planning. He had secretly recorded their attempts to bribe members of his medical team into declaring him mentally unfit. He had documented every conversation, every forged inquiry, every attempt to undermine his estate. And weeks before he died, working with a federal estate attorney, he had embedded a legally binding protective order directly into his file, one that would be triggered the moment a fraudulent claim was made against me using his name. The commander set the file down gently. She told me that by staging a dramatic, very public arrest and broadcasting it live online for hundreds of thousands of viewers to witness, my family had not destroyed me. They had handed federal investigators an airtight, time-stamped, self-documented case of elder financial abuse, forgery, extortion, and filing a false report. Hassan's legal team had deliberately left an older, more vulnerable-looking version of the estate documents accessible, knowing that my family's greed and desperation would drive them to act recklessly. They had walked directly into it. The commander unlocked my handcuffs herself and apologized quietly and sincerely. I stood and moved to the large window that looked out over the precinct's main processing area. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, the double doors opened, and my Aunt Rania, my Uncle Tariq, and my cousin Layla were brought in. The bright, triumphant expressions that had lit their faces on my driveway less than an hour ago were gone completely. In their place was something hollow and pale and terrified, as the handcuffs closed around their wrists under the same fluorescent lights they had expected to watch close around mine. Layla's live stream, which she had intended as the instrument of my public humiliation and financial ruin, became instead the most complete piece of evidence against them. Millions of people who had tuned in to watch me be destroyed watched in real time as the story reversed itself entirely. The comments shifted within minutes. By morning, what had been a pile-on became an avalanche aimed in the opposite direction. The legal process that followed was swift and without mercy. Their assets were frozen. The forged documents were dissected publicly. The charges, elder financial abuse, criminal forgery, extortion, and filing a false police report, moved through the system with the weight of federal involvement behind them. Their social standing, built so carefully on performance and performance alone, came apart completely. I didn't stay to watch the aftermath. I had already decided what I would do with the life Hassan had given back to me. I sold the estate properties that carried no personal meaning and used the proceeds to relocate to a small, quiet town near the water where I knew no one and no one knew me. I set up a fund in Hassan's name to support elder care access in underserved communities because that felt like the most honest way to honor who he had been and what he had believed in. Some nights I still sit with the weight of it. Not the arrest, not the cameras, the part where I watched people who shared my blood stand in the dark and smile while I was led away. That grief doesn't dissolve cleanly, but what I carry alongside it is something steadier, a knowing. That Hassan saw me clearly, that he trusted me with everything and protected me even from beyond his last breath. And that, in the end, is the only inheritance that has ever truly mattered.